So now we have Vinai from Vinai Kopp. I think everybody knows him, and he is a regular speaker. He is a developer from 1998. I just saw that particular thing, and he is really a great enthusiast for the open source code. Uh, he is a Magento U developer training instructor. So Vinay is going to tell us about the Magento grids, how the backend grids can work, and he is not going to use the UI elements. So Vinay, over to you, and I hope the session is going to be really fun and great learning for the developers.
Thank you, Mudit, for having me. It's an honor to be here, and this is actually the first time I'm. I don't know, can you see my video? Should be. Anyway, I shared my video here. Yeah, you can see it, awesome, very good. Right, so this is the first time I'm doing any kind of presentation or something since Meet Magento in India, which was a very different world back then, right? So it's good to be back, kind of like, hello everybody. Delighted to be here. And yeah, I hope you enjoy what I have prepared. So I want to start actually by showing this hoodie that I'm wearing, the back side of it actually, which is right here. I don't know if you can see this or something, but it says something like Magento 2 developer beta. Right? So that was, I think it was in 2014, back when, before it was released. And Magento did 2 meetings, like big public sessions where they invited some people to gather feedback from the community. One was in, I guess, Austin, the US, or maybe 2, I don't know, but they had one in Berlin and in Germany, where I was lucky enough to attend. And back then they showed a bunch of new features, everything they built for Magento 2. And amongst other things, they showed the backend UI component stuff, right? All the UI component XML basically to configure the grids and forms. And afterwards they were asking for feedback, and to be honest, well, the feedback I gave was, this is not great. Kind of, I used maybe slightly different words, but that was my main impression. And they said, yeah, we know, but when it's ready, when we release it, it will be great. Thank you for your feedback. But now we've got 2020, and it's still exactly the same. So nothing changed. And, you know, I've been working with it, and yeah, but it's always been this kind of sore spot for me, having to build these, to use this part of Magento, because some parts of Magento, it's fun developing with them, right? All the PHP side, dependency injection, and DI XML configuration, and layout XML, oh, that is great. I enjoy it. But building these backend forms and grids is not fun for me, at least. I mean, other people probably have different experiences, but that's my experience. So, fast forward a few months ago, Reacticon, Willem Willem Wigman, and I'm butchering his name here, I know it's Dutch, but hopefully you know what I'm talking about. So he gave a talk there about the Hiva Magento 2 front-end theme, completely replacing anything with Luma, no UI components, rebuilt with Alpine.js and Tailwind CSS. And I watched that recording of his presentation there, and I thought it was great. I was so impressed. All that things that he did there, it really, I loved it because, you know, instead of just using begrudgingly what Magento gave us in a way, right? He built his own, and in the way he wanted it to be, and everything, and that's exactly what we developers do, right? We build things, and that's great. So that really inspired me to finally start to do something about the backend stuff, because to be honest, I've been avoiding front-end work for the past 5 years roughly. I did a little bit, but not very much, because I didn't enjoy it a lot. So this nice, shiny front-end world that Willem built there it really didn't help me a lot. I thought it was great, but my pain point was in the backend. So to be honest, I've been dreaming about, well, we need something completely new for the backend for many years, but I never thought it feasible because, well, that should be Magento's job, right? I mean, they built a platform and I just want to build shops with it. I don't want to build the platform myself in that way. Anyway, long story short, after seeing what Willem did to the front end, I felt, okay, I'll at least give it a try. So over the past, well, roughly a week, I've been working on a system, trying to make it, do a system that I want to work with when I build backend grids, the way it should have been, in my opinion, right? So that I can do my job of building stores without having the impression of fighting the framework, but instead having the impression that the framework supports me. That's the feeling that I'm trying to go after here. I want to be lifted up by the framework instead of, held back. So yeah, that's what I want to show right now. And basically, I built all the backend logic, and Willem was kind enough to make it look nice on the front end again, because that would have taken ages for me to do it myself. And but that still also wouldn't have looked as nice as it actually did right now. So can you see my screen? The usual Zoom question here. I hope you can. Maybe I can show the chat at the same time somewhere. Yeah, looks good. Yeah, you can see my screen. Awesome, very good. Okay, so here is my IDE, right? And there's a little module here called Hiva admin test. I'm trying to pronounce it not too wrong again. And it's very simple. It's a backend controller, admin HTML test grid. It just renders an empty page right here. There's no content in there yet, so nothing special at all. Just so you know, here's the layout XML file. It also is completely the norm, nothing special there. No templates, no nothing. So let's say, I'm building some functionality, and quite often I need to visualize some processes that are happening to the merchant. Maybe display a list of exports or log messages, or maybe there's some custom entities that are being synchronized from somewhere. So usually I want to display a list of stuff, basically a grid, right? That's what we use for this kind of thing. So here is how that might look, right? For an example's purpose, I just want to share the log directory, right? Just a list of log files, so in a grid. So I'll do that. So first of all, what I need is I need a class that supplies the list of data as an array, right? And my first idea was, well, if I want to display a grid easily, it's probably best if I have an array in, an array of arrays, like each record is its own sub-array. So let's see how that would look like. So I'll create a new class here. Let's call it log file list provider. Okay, and I've got a little interface for this purpose if I want to have provide an array of data and display it in a grid, and that's the Hiva grid array provider interface. So this is a super simple grid interface. It's just one method that returns an array. So if we want to get a list of files from the log file directory, I guess I'll use the directory list to get the directory. And let's also use the IO file. Okay, the factory already was generated. Very good. So I'll initialize those properties. And now I want to read the contents of the log directory and return it as an array. And thankfully, these two classes will make it pretty easy, right? So I'll first get the file instance. Oops. It's always a little tricky typing while people are watching. Never gets completely natural, but it'll be okay. Okay, so that's the file. Now I want to change into the log directory. So this will be directory list, get path, directory list. I imported the wrong one again. So I need to import the right one. This one. Now there should be a log file constant on it. Yeah, there's it. Okay. And now we can just return file ls. Right, that returns a list of files in that given directory. So how can I make a grid out of this? Well, there's a new kind of view admin HTML subdirectory for this purpose called Hiva grid. Oops, Hiva-grid. Not grid, grid. There it is. And in here, I'll create a grid XML file. Let's call this log file grid. So the file name is like the identifier of the grid. It can be used in one place or multiple places. You'll see how that works. Okay, so this is the idea of the file, and it's XML, of course, because to be honest, I don't mind XML at all, but XML shouldn't be overly verbose, and it should be, supply sensible defaults and so on. So I want to make this whole thing work with as little configuration as necessary. But yeah, so the one thing that always needs to be provided is a source for the data. So let's use an array provider source here. And I'll just copy a reference to the class name here. Copy reference. That will give me a fully qualified class name to the class. And I'll just paste it in here. And that's all, right? That's my grid configuration. So now, how can I display this grid? Well, I have to head over to the layout XML file and insert a Hiva admin grid block, right? So a new block, and the class is Hiva grid. Where's the block? Come on, PHP Storm. Hiva admin, okay, I'll type it. Hiva admin block. Come on, what's going on here? It's not giving me the full auto-completion. Oh, whatever, I'll just copy the class name from here. And head over again here, paste, that's it. Okay, give it a name. How about log files? And there's one more thing we need to do. We need to specify the name of the grid that should be rendered here. And we specify that as a string argument. And this time I called it log file grid. So the name is log file grid, right? There's one more thing we need to do here is we need to include one other layout update, which will cause the Tailwind stuff to be loaded into the page here. So let's add an update tag here, update handle. Come on, Hiva. I don't remember it yet by default, right? It's still very new. So again, that's a file that's declared in the Hiva admin module. So Hiva admin grid, simple enough. I should have remembered that. Admin grid. So this will now be included here too. Okay, and otherwise we just specify this one block, and with the grid name, and in the grid configuration we tell it which provider to use. So if I now reload, we've got a grid, right? All the records from the arrays turn into columns. It tries to figure out types and so on, but for arrays it's all just Scala values, so here everything's a string, but that's fine, but that's already useful, right? So if I weren't doing this as a presentation, this would have been maybe 5 minutes of work, which, to be honest, even if I use some kind of code generators for UI components, I can't get it done that quickly. So that already makes my life kind of easier, right? There's paging and everything right out of the box too. But of course, just arrays of strings, that's the simplest case, right? Maybe we can make it a little better. And maybe we can customize this grid a little bit. So for example, there's one special thing here, this leave thing, which I'm not even sure what that means. I want to exclude that column, right? And I can do that by configuring under columns. I can say I want to exclude the column with the name leaf, right? So that would be the array key that I don't want to show. And now if I reload, well, that one's gone. Okay, and is image, that can stay. Okay, good enough. Okay, cool. So that's kind of fun, just returning arrays. It's pretty quick. But what about a bit more complex arrays? And maybe just another quick example. How about we use a real class, something that we can load, and then turn every record into an array using the data object processor. So how about customers? So let's do a custom array provider here. Customer array provider. And in this also implements the Hiva array provider interface. This time I want to load all customers, so I need the customer repository. Let's use the interface here. And we also need a search criteria to be able to load everything. So let's get the search criteria builder. Criteria. Builder. And let's also get the data object processor so we can turn all these objects into arrays easily. Okay, so initialize these properties. And now let's load all customers. Customer repository get list. We'll just use all, so we'll need an empty search criteria. And now we'll turn those into arrays by iterating over all customers and doing this to output array method. You know, applying that to each one of those. So that's an array map. And it will take a customer interface instance. And it will return an array for each one. And we want to iterate over the customers. And now for each one, we'll return this data object processor, build output data array for the customer. And the data object type is customer interface. Like so. Oh, something's still wrong here. And oh yeah, I'm missing the get items call back here. Okay, so now it's an array. Okay, so now we have another array provider. And it should be pretty easy to switch to this one. So I'll just copy the log file and configuration and call this one customer array grid. Okay, there's no leaf column here probably. And I'll just specify this array provider as an example. Like here. Now let's switch to our new grid here. Log file grid, now it's the customer array grid. And oops, did I save? Maybe it hasn't synchronized yet. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now here we have only a single customer in the database, it's sample data, but we basically get all the data that's available on it. And we can see that the data object processor recursively turned the value into arrays here, which are kind of rendered like this. So again, not perfect, but already could be pretty useful, right? Especially if there are many records. However, turning everything into an array might not be sufficient. Especially in Magento, where we use many repositories and everything's kind of typed and we have to specify all the annotations and everything. Maybe we can use this information to make the grids more appealing, to make them more useful. So how about we start building little product grid. And I would like to use products here because products probably are one of the most complex objects in Magento. So let's create a new grid configuration here. I'll call it products grid. And the source, this time I'll just use the repository directly, because it's also possible to specify a repository list method as the grid source. So I need to copy the class name to the product repository interface and then the get list method. So I like copy and paste, so I'll just open that class. Product repository interface, this one here, and there's get list. So again, I'll copy a reference to this thing here, copy reference, and in the provider, in the grid configuration, I'll just paste that in. Okay, and now in the grid, I'll switch to the products grid. And actually, because products are such big complex classes, I want to start specifying the columns that I actually want to display. And I can do that by using an include column configuration. And let's say I want the ID. Oops. Like this. And I want the SKU. Let's start simple. And now if I reload, let's see what this looks like. Okay, yeah, it kind of works. Oh, look at this. Now we have paging. Okay, so that's kind of neat. We can easily page along. But let's make this a bit more interesting. Let's add the name in there. And yeah, that should be easy enough. Okay. And what about an image? Right, let's make it a bit more interesting. So if we just specify the main product image, how does this look like? Okay, so by the way, under the hood, a couple of things are going on, because these properties here, ID and SKU and product name, if you are familiar a little bit with the way the product is built in Magento technically, they are provided by getter methods from the product model, right? But then there are other, oh no, come on, I want my keyboard back. Okay, I don't know, sometimes it just loses connection here. Okay, sorry about that. But okay, so we have getter methods on the model, and then we also have custom attributes. So custom attributes would be something like this. They're EAV attributes for the given entity, and they are retrieved using the get custom attributes array from the model. And then there also are extension attributes, right? So let's first have a look at this custom attribute, how we can work with this one. Well, it would be nice if we were able to display those as images and not just, get the string value here. Unfortunately, because this is a custom attribute, Magento is not able to determine the proper type here beyond, oh, it's a string, and I'll use the EAV attribute label here, which is base. That's not very nice. So let's see if we can make this a little more interesting. And we can by specifying the type, first of all, and we'll use Magento product image here. So whenever it's not possible for the logic to determine the type automatically, we can provide the type in the configuration. And okay, look at this. So if I provide the type here, it will render the fully qualified link to each product image, which is nice, but it's not quite what I expected here, right? So if we actually want to render this as the image, there's one more attribute we have to specify, which is render as secure HTML, because I wanted to err on the side of caution here, and rather than having some attack, be successful by injecting some data in the database that gets rendered in the grid, I only want to really render data that I'm sure is safe. So as soon as we specify this here, it'll just do things slightly differently, and we get images. So that's kind of nice. And we can also fix this label there. We can say label equals main image, for example, right? And there it is. So that's cool. But what about extension attributes? So products don't only have a single image, right? There's an extension attribute called a media gallery. So let's have a look what this looks like if we add a column for the media gallery here, right? So the media gallery, okay, I forgot to close the tag here. If we add the media gallery, okay, again, look at this, we're getting image tags, even 2 image tags here. So let's render this as HTML, right? And without escaping it, and see what that looks like. And okay, look at this. So this time we didn't even have to specify the type as Magento product image, because it is able to determine, based on the extension attribute interfaces, okay, this is an image. So it renders all the images in the media gallery for each image here. So that happens automatically, and it doesn't matter if it's one or multiple ones. So it can handle arrays nicely too. Add a price, for example. Let's see, there it is, but that doesn't look nice. So once again, it just knows it's basically a float. But if we specify the type as a price type, then it'll render it as a proper, whoops, reloaded it quickly, I think, before it got synchronized. There it is. Now it renders them properly as a price. So that already makes things a lot easier. But if I want to see what else is available, you know, even by default, you might have noticed, if I specify columns, it limits the number of columns to those that are configured. By default, if I don't specify any columns, right, then it will render all available columns. What if I want to do both? If I want to specify some columns, for example, because I want to specify the type, but I also wanted to just get all the others that I didn't explicitly specify and render them as well. Well, I can do this with the attribute keep all source columns. If I set this to true, now we'll get all available attributes right here. Okay, so we can see there also are media gallery entries. If we wanted to render those as HTML, we would need to actually configure the column and give it the type with proper, not the proper type, but render as insecure HTML. We need to set that as true too. You can see we have tier prices, which just renders a bit of information. So these are objects which are kind of represented as a string here to some degree, right? It's still kind of simple, but it works. Cross-sell, links, we have cross-sells, we have upsells, and so on. And if there are too many records here, I think by default it's like 5, it just says, okay, I have more records, and shows it that way. So now we can look at what's available and start limiting to what's there. So that's all the configuration that's necessary to get this. And that's kind of nice. I can also exclude columns now. If I was say, okay, I want everything except, let's say, category gear, because that's not used here. Exclude column name category gear, something like this here. And okay, now that one's gone. Oh, by the way, activity here, this is another EAV attribute, a custom attribute, which uses options, and it automatically takes the option values and renders them as option labels here. So that stuff, you know, when it's stringified, it kind of takes care of that too. And it combines all of the system attribute, custom attributes, and extension attributes into a simple interface. So we don't really have to care which one's which. Okay, so this kind of repository get list method works with any method that takes a search criteria and returns a search results instance. So we can use it for customers or orders or anything pretty much, right? And sometimes, however, we will need to tweak how columns are rendered. Okay, so I also wanted to make that as easy as possible. Most of the time, what that means for me is I just want to specify a template where I render some content in a specific way. So, for example, I could render category as links here that can be clicked, or maybe this main product image, maybe I want to render the alt tag with the, there's a separate custom attribute called, this one is called like image, and the second one is image label, and then we have small image and small image label. So I have two different attributes, and maybe I want to combine them into a single column. So let's just do this. Let's render this main image and actually combine two columns there, the image column and the image label column, and render them as one. To do that, I need to create a template. Let's call it image PHTML. Seems good enough. And in here, we now can get the class that represents the current cell that's being rendered. And we can get that from the block get data cell. So it's basically a view model, right? And we can also add a type in here. It's a cell interface instance right here. And now we can render, let's start simple here. Oh man, PHP Storm, I can't get used to you always. Okay, that's what I wanted. Adding the full PHP tag there. Maybe I can turn that off somewhere. So let's start by using cell get text value here, and just output this as a little test, just so we see something is different. Now, to use this template, we have to set it in the grid configuration on the image tag right here. So I'll say template. What is this module called? It's called Hive admin test image PHTML. There it is. Let's add a line break. And now if I reload, instead of doing the rendering automatically, it actually will render this template. And there it is. So now, how can we render this as a image tag with an alt tag with a small image label? Well, first we need to get the current column name key, is what I call them here. So that would be just like the attribute code. And we can get that from the column definition. The column definition is all the configured or determined extracted properties of the column. So in this case, that would be the key. And now the label key will be $key, and we'll append underscore label and label key. That's better. And now we want to get the cell representing this key, and we can get that using let's see, cell get row. So that would be the current row that's being rendered, and then we can access other cells this way, right? So actually, I'll just inline this one here. Now we have the label still. Okay, so now time to add a image tag here. Yeah, that looks right. Let's use the escape HTML attribute here. So it's nice and safe. And now we want to render the alt text, and that would be the label cell. And if this didn't exist, like image label, it would return null. So it's probably best if we actually check if it was specified. So if it was specified, we'll use label cell get text value. Otherwise, we'll just use an empty string. Okay, right. So this is a little example. So wait a moment. So this here should be like this. And now I want to close the image tag. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so we're rendering the first cell contents here and the second cell contents here. And probably we also should escape this here. So escape HTML attribute right here. Okay, so let's reload and see what this gives us. And there it is. And if we inspect the contents here, we can see now alt, well, yeah, it does render an alt image thing there. Unfortunately, these images don't seem to have very good alt, right? But we can see it actually does work. So fair enough. That's how blocks can be combined, and that's called a custom renderer. There are more options there in the grid XML. Just to give you a quick, example of how that would look like. If I in the layout XML configured another block somewhere, I could use that existing pre-configured block to render the items by also specifying a render a block name here. I just specify the block name, and then it will always set the current cell on that block and use that to render it. So we're not limited to simple template blocks. That might be useful, for example, if I wanted to add some kind of, I don't know, other view models into the mix, whatever. Very good. So almost done. There's just a little more I want to show here, which is I can, of course, also add actions. Right? Let's say we want to be able to link to a form. So let's add an action for that. Each action needs to have an ID. That's mainly used to when, well, you know, all these XML files are merged together from different modules, as always with Magento. So if we want to change values of a pre-configured action from a different module, that's what this ID is for. It's the ID attribute. I'll just call this edit, and the URL I'll use, that's basically the route where it would be sent. And, you know, let's see how this looks. Actually, let me get rid of all these other columns because that's not really helpful. So I can specify false or just remove this again because that's the default anyway. So now when I reload that, okay, so here we have an actions column with an action. And by default, it uses the first column to get the key that it sends to the target URL. So we can also specify that ID column property here. So that means, okay, use the ID as a parameter. And we can also specify the, here we can specify the ID param. That's the name of the parameter that will be used. So it takes the value of this column for that row and adds it to this route with this ID. So it depends on what that controller then would receive, right? Of course, we would still have to build that controller, but at least rendering this action column here is easy to do. And we, of course, can add multiple actions here, like another one would be delete. Maybe a different route. And I don't want to specify that here since that's the default right now anyhow. I try to build it in a way that the default usually do the right thing. So I don't have to specify stuff if I don't want to. And now we have two actions here. And of course, there are also mass actions. So if I want to specify mass actions, I can add an action like reindex URL. Reindex action, something like this. And as soon as there's a mass action, oops, something's wrong. Let me just check. So this is still a very early product, right? So what did I do wrong here? Argument 1 pass to get cell must be of type string, null given. Huh, interesting. So how can I do this? Maybe I'm missing the ID column param here. Maybe I haven't specified the default good enough yet here. Yeah, okay. So that should also be the default. But you can see, let me just take a note so I can fix that later here. Default mass action ID column. Okay, we get the proper fields. We can select and deselect as we know it, and we can drop down with all the different actions. And as soon as we select an action, it automatically calls that controller with a post this time with all the IDs. And if we some kind of dangerous action, let's say we also have a delete action here, delete mass action. There's also we can specify require confirmation true. So now if I specify delete, it'll actually only do it. Oh yeah, I have to select some records. Delete. Are you sure? No, actually, I'm not sure. And I won't execute the action right now because that will just bring me to a 4.4 page anyhow. Okay, then there's navigation. So I can specify pager configuration, so page sizes. Let's say I want to, by default, we would have 10, 20, 50, but let's say I want 2, 5, and 10. So now this will give me a grid with 2, 5, and 10. And we also have a default page size, which is the pre-selected rows per page run. What? Default page size 5. Oh man, I just messed with the XSD file before starting this presentation, so maybe I shouldn't have done this. Okay, so live fixing, awesome. Just what I didn't want to do. So default min occurs 1. Default page size. Oh, I know what's wrong. Oh yeah, that should be in this order. It's a sequence. So yeah, I still have to tweak the XSD a little bit, but there it is. You know, if I go back to the default, so wrong one link here, I have a test, it will now choose the new default pager size. There's also sorting that can be configured here by the default sort by column and the default sort direction. Sorting is actually already implemented, just not on the template yet. So by clicking on the header, it would resort the columns accordingly. The sorting actually happens server-side, so all it does is it populates the search criteria that's passed to the repository accordingly. And okay, that's pretty much the current state of things. There's still a lot which will be coming. So there's you know, we can, what else is there to do? Oh yeah, multiple grids on one page works, except for the links for navigating, for paging, and so on aren't qualified by grid namespace yet, so that's coming. Filtering is the next thing that I want to implement. A collection source type, so it's possible to add just a plain collection. We don't have to specify a repository, just any Magento collection class would work for providing grid data. Ajax paging, that is actually super simple to do. That's just so the whole page doesn't reload, but just the grid. And to be honest, when I reload here, most of the time during the reload is actually everything but the grid. The grid itself is super fast. And so far, there's no caching in the whole process, so I might as well just cache the merged files here. But to be honest, won't make a big difference. And then also, I want to add a query source type. So it's possible to configure tables and columns to query and joins and everything directly in the grid XML, and it'll just build a select to fetch the data out of the database. So we don't even have to provide repositories or array providers or anything, because in many cases, I just want to visualize the content of some kind of table. And if that's all we need, why not add a query source type too? Currently, we just have the array source provider and the repository source provider. Then there's inline grid editing, which will require specifying a method on a repository that takes the thing that's being saved, like the row data, and saves it. But once that's done, adding inline editing shouldn't be that difficult, because it's all the type information already is available. So should it be a select drop down, you know, if it's an EAV attribute, I have all the information there. Shouldn't be too hard to render an inline editing form there. And then once that's done, that's basically everything that's needed for the grids. And then finally, yeah, form page support. So I want the form generation to be just as easy. And then it's actually fun to work in the Magento backend again and to build stuff there. And again, thanks to Willem to inspiring me to actually start building this. Again, I've been thinking about doing it for ages, but never thought it was feasible because, well, you know, it's not my job, but it is my job. If I want it, I need to build it. And just like he did for the front end. So that's really awesome. I'm so impressed by that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I have no idea about time. I forgot to start my timer. Maybe the question, maybe we can, otherwise I'm happy to move on. Let's see.
Yeah, Vinay, we have a few questions, and really, it's a really impressive and very simple way of creating a grid at the backend. Thank you for the session. I think we have two questions. One, I think you had already answered with your presentation. How can we manage sorting, filtering, and pagination, etc.? So you had already answered for this, is it?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Sorting and pagination already is implemented. Pagination actually only works with the repository list type, because the array list type still need to add that in there, but that's just basically array sliding and array sort, so it should be pretty quick to implement too. Okay, and Fabian, cool. Hi, Fabian. I'm curious how you determined how to display the media gallery extension attribute. Oh, good question. Is this a pre-configured mapping, or can it be really derived by core methods alone? Well, not quite. So I wanted to make this as extensible as possible, and there are two types of things in there. I have a data type guesser interface, which can take either a type, a value, or a type being like a class name or like a custom attribute type, like a varchar or decimal or whatever, right? So some kind of type. And then I have classes that implement this to try to figure out what it is. And then there's also another type of interface here, which is a data type value to string converter interface, which has a toString and toString recursive method. And just for convenience, both are combined into a single data type interface too. So anything which can be determined automatically just can implement this interface. If it's something that can't be determined automatically but has to be set explicitly in the grid configuration, like the price thing, then it just needs to implement the value to type string converter interface. And here are some examples. So these are the current data types that I implemented. So for example, the price data type just looks like this. There's a code representing this data type. And toString uses the price currency to format it. And recursive, that doesn't make sense here, so it just does the same thing as toString. This recursion actually only makes sense for arrays in a way. So there's an array data type. So anything where the type ends with 2 square brackets uses this data type by default. And yeah, it basically does a bit more work to determine the types of the sub-array records and try to render those and so on. But let's have a look at the image gallery or the gallery data type. So here what it does is it checks if the type gallery, oh no, this is a better example here. So here, for example, it checks if it's an instance of a product attribute media gallery entry interface. Right, then it says, okay, this is a media gallery entry, so I know how to convert this. And the image conversion, I used a separate class there, which is the product media class, which just, because there are so many similar product image types, right? There's a product image, which is just the string in the media directory for like custom attributes. And then there's these media gallery entry things, which are images. And then there's also the gallery type for custom attributes. It's also similar. So all of those just delegate to the same class. Lots of different types, which are basically the same thing. It's kind of annoying, but they all just use this simple one, which just gets the image string. And I don't really use this, but it's also possible to specify the type of image to link to, that would be the size or whatever. And then it uses, it needs to emulate the front end to load the current design and can generate the image URL, and that's what it basically returns. And then it can either return that as a image tag or just as a URL, and that's what's used. Whether, let's say, for product image, if it's recursive call, it will actually use this image HTML element thing, because recursive is used when for rendering HTML, and toString is used to just get a text value, and that's just the image URL. So anyway, that's how it ended up being. It's not the perfect abstraction there, but it works quite nice and it's easy to extend. So as soon as I'm encountering some kind of object or instance that I don't have a matching type for, I'll just implement another little data type class. They're pretty small, and I can render it in whatever way I want. Or if it's something more specific, I can always create a custom template for it. Oh, there's another question. Is it part of Hiva theme? Hiva admin is not part of Hiva theme. I will release it as open source because I don't think it can be productized very nicely. Front-end themes make money, right, for merchants, so they're happy to pay for them. That's great. But here, developers, it would take quite some convincing of merchants that they need to pay for this, because, well, backend grids, that should work out of the box actually, right? So I don't know, probably not a big market. Same for same for like agencies. Maybe I'll make it donationware. I don't know, but it won't be a lot of money for sure. It'll be free, but maybe I'll ask for donations. We'll see. It's not yet released. I will release it very soon, in a week or two maybe. Can you help in some way? Yeah, definitely. You can implement data types, for example, and find bugs and everything. How much will it cost? Yeah, how much work was it? Well, I've been working on it now for 5 days, so that's not too much. Still very early, but it's getting somewhere. Willem, is it available somewhere? Yeah, it will be available. It is currently on the Hiva GitLab instance, so it will be available there soon. And thanks again for Willem to making it look nice. So every time something looks nice here in the backend, that's Willem's work. Something looks kind of kludgy, that's my work. And then the backend stuff is all my work. So yeah, I really hope this will be useful and make working in the backend more fun and quicker. And that's actually where I can then finally make some money out of this, right? Because I can still charge a whole day for building a backend grid and be done in 5 minutes. Because, you know, merchants are used to paying a lot of money now for building backend stuff, even though now we don't need as much time anymore, hopefully. So that's all. Thank you very much. Looking forward to your questions, or if you want to reach out to get access to it at when it's released, let me know. Probably the best way to do this and to follow updates is Twitter. So yeah, thanks. Probably I went way over time. Sorry about that.
No issues, Vinay. Thank you. Thank you for the insightful session over the grids, and it is really nice to see how easy we will be able to create these grids. Once it will be live, I'm sure the developers are going to use it.
I will. So awesome if others too use it. Thank you.